different district. Here he goes, crossing himself. Oh! He's done.
Welcome everybody to another edition of Hot Program. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, folks, I am in airplane mode. And now a man who, when Christians told him about the fruits of the Spirit, went to get his chimoy out of the refrigerator, a man who needs no introduction. How you doing today, my one black friend?
I'm well. Hello, Pocket Locker, and hello, everyone.
I'm good. What is a chimoy?
Okay, so chamoy is this stuff that is something people put on fruit, like in Latin culture. Not all Latin cultures, but like if you're from Mexico, you might put chamoy on your fruit to enhance the flavor.
Oh, the topping?
It's like, think of it like I don't want to say hot sauce. I've never tasted it. I just know of it because I'll buy. You've probably seen in movies or TV. There'll be some guy or gal with a fruit cart, and they'll ask you, "Do you want squeeze of lime or chamoy or salt?"
Oh, yeah, it's sauce.
Yeah, and I've never tried it, so it might be the best thing ever. I'll never know because I'm not interested in it. I like delicious fresh fruit that they have. So that's typically what I go for.
I'm a big hot sauce guy.
Me too.
Not on my fruit. That's
hey, look, it might be the best thing. It might be the best thing ever. I don't know.
It might.
I don't know.
Very, very well could be. It's good to see everybody here. So today we've got a throwback lined up because today's video is from, what did it say here? 13 years ago. 13
way
years
back
ago.
in time.
Way back in time. And but it is called the Non-Existingness, the Hiddenness of God by William Lane Craig.
Now, when I think, I'm sorry to interrupt. When I think of William Lane Craig, I always think of that clip from Friday with John Witherspoon on the toilet telling Ice Cube, "You don't have to lie, Craig."
Yeah. You know, I gotta say, the first time I heard about divine hiddenness, I was particularly infuriated.
Really?
You know, I do, yeah, because it was one of those things where it was like they have a whole concept for this excuse, right? And they like it's like they're clearly lying at this point. And I think I don't know, maybe it was William Lane Craig. But yeah, you know, it's I feel bad that Christianity got over on me. And you realize, like, when you start to come up with an actual concept for the fact that God seems to apparently not be there, you're just like, wow, you guys are, that's when you realize it's this whole industry. But I guess if you're a Christian, you know, I guess maybe he'll break it down in a way that makes sense for Christians. But yeah, divine hiddenness is a problem.
I'm gonna Google, does the Bible say God is hidden? By the way, can you hear
I think it does. I think it does to some extent. I know it says things like he hides his ways from the wise and this type of thing. And, you know, there's apologetics around, you know, how you wouldn't have to have faith. Let's see where he goes with it.
Okay. There is
Go ahead.
There like the first one I see is bible.knowing-jesus.com. They have a list, 34 verses, and other sites have something to say about it too. So go ahead, Pakman, please.
All right.
Philosophers on epistemological concerns about God has moved on to a discussion of the so-called hiddenness of God, which is closely related to the presumption of theism in the absence of evidence. The basic thrust of the objection, called the hiddenness of God, is based upon the conviction that God's existence is not as obvious as it could be, or as one might desire. The atheist objects that if God existed, then we would expect to see more evidence of his existence than what we do have. There's a probability that if God were there, that he would disclose himself in some way so that his existence would be more obvious. And given that God is hidden, so to speak, that his existence is not obvious, this counts as evidence against God's existence. Now, one's perspective on this problem of the hiddenness of God cannot but be influenced by your assessment of natural theology. Remember, natural theology is the project of trying to show that God exists without appealing to biblical revelation. Rather, you appeal to reason and to evidence in order to show that God exists. And if you think that the project of natural theology is successful, that is to say, that there are good arguments and evidence for the existence of God, then you're apt to be skeptical of the atheist's claim here that God's existence is so hidden. You'll be skeptical of his claim.
Yeah, this is literally look at the trees. If you look at the trees and you think it's apparent that God is obvious, then you might be skeptical of the atheist who is saying, and this is why natural theology has failed, and failed a long time ago, because there is nothing about the trees, there's nothing about the waves, the wind, the shape of the planet, any of this stuff that speaks to anything about God. Matter of fact, quite the opposite is these are all, natural processes, and when things go awry, terrible things can happen. Actually, just in my backyard now, currently, we had a bad storm here and a bunch of trees fell over, and a tree fell literally like a huge tree, like crushed the fence. It's like everything. It crushed my whole backyard, and it fell like a foot from the door. Like it's like
are you sure that wasn't divine intervention from preventing it from falling on the house? Now allow me to play the
that's how
Christian
that's how they do it. Yeah,
I'll be the Jesus advocate here. So now you have all this opportunity to have ample firewood to keep you warm in winter. You don't have to care for those trees anymore. You'll have fewer leaves to rake. I could just go on and on and on about how it's totally God and everything was just exactly right. Even though it seems bad that God uses every work to glorify himself, and it's actually a blessing that those trees fell.
Yeah, it's just, but and they have to do that about everything. They have to do that about why children are not getting cured of diseases, why people are starving, why people.
That's what aboutism. That's what aboutism. You're not focusing on the trees. And even Look at the Trees has chimed in saying you may have had drunk trees. I think you need to consider that as
well. But yeah, this natural theology is. And the other thing that's interesting about it is you could use it to argue for any religion, right? The God of any religion, they all have creator religions. And so you could say, doesn't the wind speak to the majesty of the spirit of the creator moving to the earth? And you could just ask which creator, So it's very weird. I will say this about William Lane Craig. I really do think he's emblematic of the ways that apologetics contributes to the downfall of Christianity. Because of his debates and his lectures and the all the clones and this whole, Christo-fascist apologist industry that's popped up, it's done more to pull and help people get out of religion, I think, than anything else, because there's so much opportunity now to jump into how ridiculous their arguments are that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I guess he's doing some good in the world.
That if God existed, we should expect to see more evidence of existence than what we do have. And you'll remember that this was a point I raised in the debate with Austin Dacey, where I argued that there's absolutely no basis to think that if God existed, that we should have more evidence of his existence than the origin of the universe out of nothing a finite time ago, the incredibly improbable fine-tuning of the universe for the existence of intelligent life, the existence of a realm of objectively existing moral values and duties, the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead, and the experience in our immediate personal lives of God's presence. It's hard to understand how one could claim that if those arguments for God's existence are cogent, that God is in fact hidden. Michael Scriven, whom I quoted when we talked about the presumption of atheism, at the end of the day held that we are justified in rejecting the existence of something only if the claim that it exists is wholly unsupported. That is to say, there is no evidence at all in favor of this thing. There is no particular evidence for it, and it is not even supported by sort of general considerations in its favor. Now, on the basis of this criterion, Scriven advocated that we should be merely agnostic and not disbelieving about even such entities as the Loch Ness Monster and the abominable snowman.
Well, I don't know why William Lane Craig would go here, because this is exactly the problem with Christianity. There's no more reason to believe in things like the abominable snowman and the Loch Ness Monster than there is in Christianity. Matter of fact, the only reason that William Lane Craig believes in one and not the others is because of what I guess he believes it'll do for him or can do for him or his personal relationship with the Loch Ness Monster. And yeah, I just it's very hard to believe that William Lane Craig takes his faith seriously.
I think William Lane Craig is a businessman in the sense that he knows this God business and he knows it well. What people will pay to hear and are indeed thankful to hear. He references the Loch Ness Monster. There have been extensive searches to find this Loch Ness Monster where they've mapped the bottom of the loch. They've used like sonar trying to find, like sincerely, right? Trying to find the Loch Ness Monster. So either it is unresponsive to sonar, so sonar can't detect it, or it's just not there. We either accept the stories that it was a hoax, or people keep believing in it. And so since people have a choice, let's admit it's not very exciting to not believe in the Loch Ness Monster, but it may be fun and invigorating to go to Loch Ness and search for the Loch Ness Monster yourself, because you believe everybody else has botched up the search and can't find it, but you will. That gives your life an element of excitement it didn't have before, a purpose, if you will. And I think that's where religion gets down in boogies. It has the ability to give people who don't feel they have a purpose. And so what Craig does, in my opinion, is essentially he helps to maintain that. He helps clarify he turns the problems into dust, one might say, because he's good at explaining away the problems. I think in probably the last year and a half, we've seen him evolve a little to where maybe what he wants to do is help people let go. I think he's there. He's trying to help people let go. Like, look, folks, this isn't real. Society isn't going to go to hell if we take a step back from Christianity, or not Christianity. If we take a step back from the God of Christianity being authentic. Maybe what we ought to take from Christianity is all those beautiful moral lessons about cooperation, loving people, charity, patience, understanding, and just celebrate that. Celebrate and practice that.
So has he been saying something recently? Because I've always seen it as him just being a coward and basically admitting that he's not a Christian for the intellectual reasons and philosophical arguments he's about to dive into, but that he thinks when you're in debate or when you're in lecture or when you're quote unquote defending the faith, these are the things you should use. That's how he's always said it.
Paul, it became a bit of a thing for a while, that clip where he talked about how he lowered the bar. Because I'd say since that point in time, when I only occasionally listen to William Lane Craig. I'm not a regular listener or viewer of his, but since that quote, I think to me that's where he's sort of letting people down easily, in my view, as I've listened to him. Him lowering the epistemic bar for the evidence of Christianity. Again, if there's a slight chance that it's true, he's all for it. Now, I don't know that he still feels that way. I think William Lane Craig has bankrolled enough cash that he can tell people like it is. And he just hasn't done it yet. He's hinting about how it really is, what's really going on.
I don't know. I think he's revealing how desperate he is to remain a Christian. I think he's just, but yeah, I don't. Go ahead.
To be fair, you said this is from 12 or 13 years ago.
No, I mean, when he did the whole lowering the epistemic bar thing, I think I think that was a particular low point for him. But a lot of people don't know why he's getting that way. Is it that he's nearing retirement? He's tired of the fundamentalist stick? I don't really know, but it definitely just felt like it wasn't not problematic to me. It was just like further hypocrisy. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of this guy.
He thought that in those cases, the Loch Ness Monster and the Abominable Snowman, these beliefs were not wholly unsupported. They were not wholly lacking in either general support or in some particular evidence. But surely any unprejudiced inquirer will discern as much evidence for the existence of God as for the Loch Ness Monster or the Abominable Snowman, in which case the so-called hiddenness of God simply doesn't prove or give evidence or reason to think that God does not exist. So one can question the basic assumption of the hiddenness of God, that the existence of God is wholly unsupported. The theist can, and I think should, rightly maintain that we have considerable evidence for God's existence and that therefore God is not so hidden after all. But other atheists are unsatisfied even with the evidence that we do have, and they've taken a more radical, more extreme position. They've argued that if God existed, he would actually prevent the world's unbelief by making his existence so starkly apparent that everyone would believe in him. There would be
Can you pause it? Can you pause right there? Can you pause it right there?
For example, God.
I think his point there, if God existed, he should make himself so evident, so evident that people couldn't help themselves but to believe. Now, I don't know what he says after this, but I want to address that. I believe if there was a God that actually existed, the God of Christianity, who had all these rules and heavy consequences for not following them, right? I could go to hell because I'm not on Jesus's OnlyFans page. When they open the book of life, my name's not on there because I'm a freaking atheist and I don't even think Jesus was real.
Right.
Right? I denied the Holy Spirit and all that stuff. I'm not in that book.
Right.
If God had just honestly revealed himself, then
The
even
one
if I
thing he
didn't
won't
want to,
do.
yeah, even if I didn't want to still fall down on my knees and fall on my face, as the Old Testament says, and worship him, I'd still know. I then wouldn't, I don't know, this podcast would be about something else, I suppose, if we still had
Yep.
it. And I would voluntarily, if there's a hell, I'd voluntarily go there. As I studied the Bible, what was a huge turnoff was the ill behavior of the Old Testament God, and I don't think much more of the New Testament God either. I couldn't reconcile myself to love or worship a character who was violent, abusive, divisive, and could do the worst things and then call out somebody else. Well, you're wrong because you wore mixed fabrics. Sure. Really? I'm probably wearing mixed fabrics now, but I never killed anybody.
Yeah, most of us probably are.
You know, I didn't steal people's land. I didn't drive them out with hornets and stuff like that. You know, I didn't wipe out most of the world, but I'm no better than he is. I'm worse. Fine.
Exactly.
Fine. That God would be even nastier, I would say, if he existed and still hid himself and had a hell as a result of not believing that Jesus was his son and had all these magical powers and what.
Yeah, so for me, the hiddenness of God is the ultimate gaslight. It's the ultimate way to try to tell you what is very apparent to you, that, life is ordinary and things go about, according to natural laws, and you don't really see them suspended, and you don't see the things you would expect if God were intervening. And then the thing that makes it so much worse is it's contradicted both in scripture and in the lived experience of the Christian. So there really isn't, I really noticed something here, that when we talk about the divine hiddenness thing, especially with William Lane Craig, we should maybe specify divine hiddenness for atheists, because he's very specific. The atheist argument about divine hiddenness when responding to the atheist, right? Because he'd have to say something else entirely to deal with most Christians. Because what? First off, please notice how the story of the Bible is God showed up in a burning bush. God showed up in, the flood, and, God brought people out of slavery, and, God raised Jesus from the dead, and he appeared to 500, and he multiplied the fishes and the loaves, and he walked on water. There's all this apparent stuff. And then again, in the experience of most Christians, like we were just joking about a guy who won a big boxing match, and wanted to give all praise and glory and honor to God, and people, thank God for helping me find my parking spot and all of this stuff. So there's all these ways that God is so apparent to them, moving in their day-to-day lives, helping them. It's so clear, God help me get this job or whatever. But then to us, they turn around and they're supposed to be a divine explanation, or somehow this is part of God's attributes that he's not apparent. So it's really weird. It's a very, it's a specific thing to address a challenge from outside the faith, because really the people of the faith, the way they understand the doctrine and the way they often speak of their lived experiences, God is showing up all the time. Gerbmania just said, it's interesting God brought the Israelites out of slavery, yet still kept slavery around. freedom for me, but not for thee. Yeah, absolutely. And we were just covering too how they there was like a slave Bible that
Yes.
excluded much of the Old Testament and much of the New Testament too. And you know, part of what was excluded was all this stuff about freedom and the anti-slavery stuff. You know, because again, they didn't Christians again. It was white American Christians were supposed to read about the Israelites and all that stuff and understand that that was messaging for God wanted them to be free, but it was not supposed to clearly apply to everybody. So pretty
The Constitution is that way.
That's actually that's what I said. That was like that was my whole thing. That it reminds me of the Constitution. Just absolutely reminds me of the Constitution.
God could have inscribed made by God upon every molecule in the universe. Or he could have put a neon cross in the sky with the words Jesus saves or something of that sort, in which case everyone would recognize his existence. And so some atheists actually tried to blame God for the unbelief in the world. They say that if God existed, there shouldn't be any unbelief in the world because God would make his existence so starkly apparent that everyone would believe in him. And therefore the fact that there is unbelief is really God's fault, or rather goes to show that there is no God, because if there were a God, there would be no unbelief. And
can you pause
it? Came out in the debate with Austin Dacey.
Okay, I'm looking for a quote. Acts 11:18. Hold on. Get me here. Acts 11:18. So, as many of us may have read, faith is a gift from God. So, is it 2 Timothy 2:25? Maybe. It's Acts 1. Oh, well, crap. All right. So I'm leaning on the internet here. I can't find exactly what I want. 18, when they heard these things, they held their peace and glorified God, saying, then hath God also the Gentiles granted repentance unto life. So, okay, so God is granting repentance. That's not what I need. There's a verse that says the reason you believe is because God gave you faith. That's why you believe. You have been selected,
right,
to have faith. Not that you did it all by yourself because you can figure stuff out. No. It's a gift from God.
Right.
So if that is the case, then I'll never understand if the God of the Bible is real. I'll never understand why he couldn't have better practices. Why? There's a better way of reaching people than just selecting them. Right? If they hear it, they want it, it should happen.
Yeah. And
Ephesians 2:8. Thank you.
And it's an awful lot like racism. I mean, it's an awful lot like all of there's no other area do we consider it okay to be part of the chosen race, to say we were pre-select. I mean, this is like the Calvinists and all these people. I mean, but it's essential to the message of Christianity that you're saved, and I really do feel like you're comfortable with bigotry if you buy into the idea that you're part of a people that deserves better than everybody else. And we get away from that. We like you know, if somebody walked around and said I'm white and sorry, we're just part of the chosen race. You ain't heard? You ain't heard who runs this thing? Yeah, so we just get the biggest houses, we get the best jobs, we get more opportunities. And gang, that's actual factuals in reality. You still can't say that. you can't approve of that. You can't be a fan of that. We're like, yeah, you're a white supremacist asshole. We need to do something about that. Like you can't do that. But it is literally fine to walk around and say, I'm a Christian. That means I deserve everlasting life. And everybody else deserves something in the spectrum from just flat out being annihilated to, you know, eternal torture and hell. And then we go like, yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, we really need to tell people that that's a pretty screwed up way to view other people.
Well, I have something for our audience you can try when you're hearing people preach to you in any religion, really, about the tenets of their religion and the benefits and all that stuff. When it comes to, oh, we're going to live forever, blah, 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 you can just ask, like, hey, what's your proof for that? That's a hard question to answer, because if it is just a claim, then it's fairly empty. If it's just a claim, do we have someone we can talk to and actually get a response while we're having this conversation? Because it's just a claim.
Yeah, and they have to realize that too. About that's always been true. Just like we don't know anybody now who can verify for us that they could live forever. There's been nobody who told the authors of the Bible that, and that's another unobservable thing. Just like you know, so we sometimes talk about the things people clearly could not have witnessed. You could not witness the formation of the earth, the creation, the flood. None of those things really could have been observed.
Yeah, who wrote that flood story down?
But there's also the sort of the bigger theological promises, which are equally as nobody could ever observe that, like eternal life and salvation, things like that. So, yeah, great point. All right, let's
again. Daisy was not satisfied with the 6 arguments that I gave for the existence of God, but he wanted to say that even though there might be that evidence, it's not enough, because there's still many people who don't believe in God, and that if God existed, he would supply enough evidence so that everyone would believe in him. Now, what might we say in response to that? Would God make his existence more obvious if he existed than what we do see? Well, many theists have pointed out in response to this that God, in order to preserve human free will, has not simply overwhelmed us with the apparentness of his existence. God could have simply given a theophany of himself in such a way that everyone would have to believe that he exists, and it would in effect override human free will, and that therefore, in order to make faith in God a free human decision, there has to be a sort of arm's distance at which God has created us, so to speak.
Can you pause it? Can you pause it?
Distances.
So, according to, and thanks, I forget who put it in the chat, Ephesians 2:8. So, because of that, and I'll read it, it's not a free will choice. It's just not. And so, I'll admit that just like I couldn't remember this verse, it may be that in presenting his argument or forming his argument, Dr. Craig didn't remember this verse either. Faith is not a choice. So Ephesians 2:8, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. Again, there's no choice involved in my part. I am essentially a robot if I have faith. That's not an insult to people who have faith. That's meaning the programming has been downloaded into your brain and you have no choice but to react in a specific way as far as having faith goes. You may have other free choices, but you don't have that one.
Yeah, absolutely. There's there isn't any, and hang on, and this gets at a point that I think is actually really important, which is I don't think we take this seriously. Like I could not run a cult out of my house and just lie to people's children and teach them that they're cursed and all of this stuff. We don't take religion seriously in this society because we would take that seriously. Think about the conversations we're having around consent, coercion, indoctrination, grooming, all of this shit. But Christianity gets a pass on all of these. Even there's just so much. There's so much going on. I'm even thinking of circumcision. It's just a lot of this stuff is just weird, and it's very odd to me that we allow this to happen. We would at least, to me, be more reasonable if we were at least trying to convince people that this stuff is not true. If we were at least making efforts to expose these cults, making efforts to expose the churches, making efforts to make them pay taxes. It's just very strange to me that we watch people get indoctrinated in this stuff. We watch people give all their money away to the church. We've seen the empty promises. We've seen the death and destruction. And we're determined to just let people live their entire lives and die this way. And we never take seriously the idea that they would not do this, they would not believe this if they were able to make informed decisions as adults.
I'm not going to quote "Look at the trees" because I wasn't ready. I didn't have a pen to write it down. Look at the trees wrote something on the order, "Faith is using lack of evidence as evidence." That is brilliant. That is brilliant. And I don't think I ever thought about it that way, but I will now. And I think I should definitely quote you or paraphrase you when talking to others about that. I think that might be a simple way to help them decouple the fervor of their belief with the reality of what it actually is. Faith is using the lack of evidence as evidence. Thank you. Thank you.
And divine hiddenness is a perfect example of that, right? God not being around is just makes it obvious that he's omnipresent and is giving you free will and all this type of stuff. Now, I think William Lane Craig is going to throw that under the bus a little bit here, but that's another William Lane Craig thing that he does so well is he comforts Christians. Even though if you listen closely to what he says, he typically undermines most Christian arguments. He just replaces it with something else they can feel comforted about. And then they can feel like they've gotten educated, right? Like they've gone from the kindergarten understanding of an argument to rather than, realizing that the argument isn't true. Now they've got the big kid version of it from William Lane Craig.
Philosophers say, an epistemological distance at which God has created us that makes his existence not more obvious. I don't think this response is entirely adequate, however, because even if God made his existence absolutely obvious so that everyone could see that he exists, the question would still remain of whether or not we're going to place our faith in him in the sense of having a trust in God, a personal love relationship with him. And so even if it were true that God...
Again, and this is again, you don't have a relationship with God. This is just language. This is part of that thing. I mean, like, there's no way, because Christians, think about this. Christians, in a sense, don't just believe in the Loch Ness monster. They have a pet Loch Ness monster, right? They have a pet Loch Ness monster that walks with them and talks with them and tells them he's their friend, right? Like, they have this relationship with God, and God is everywhere. They want to thank God, right? God is the cook. God literally put the food on the table, provided the house and everything, such that before you even eat that turkey, you better I just want to give all praise and honor to God, and who's the head of this household. And Lord Jesus, thank you for providing another meal for the nourishment of our bodies and the blessings of our soul. In the name of the Father. Like this deep, intimate relationship, when you run up to an atheist who just doesn't happen to believe, who just doesn't happen to be part of your religion, you can't convince us that the other party to this relationship even exists. Gang, look, I'm going to tell you what happens when you have a relationship as a grown man with something that doesn't exist.
No.
We'll put you in a mental hospital, and you are not allowed to be out in reality land unsupervised with the rest of us unless you agree to take your medication every day and see a shrink on a regular basis, because you're just totally lost it, unregulated.
Pocket locker, God goes to another school. That's why you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I gotta circle back to the sea monster bit. So if you are a Christian, many of us have heard Christian people say things that are rather striking to us, like, wait, that's ridiculous. Like, there's a firmament. Now we know there's not a firmament. Human beings have gone to the moon. Right? It's just not there. And yet people will say again and again that it is. Not all Christians, but you have some who do. So the Loch Ness monster, not only it's not real, right? But there are people who will use the Bible, and I'm going to do it, who will use the Bible to back up the claim. Okay? So I'm going to Psalm 74, verse 13 and 14. It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of the desert. Now, I bet you if I switch translations, that's NIV. Let's go King James, full King James. If I can find it here. All right. It doesn't call him. Yeah, here we go. 13. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Well, we have a concept of what a dragon is, something like a brachiosaurus only breathes fire and has wings, when it just meant snake to them, a serpent. Right. It didn't mean something on the order of a brachiosaurus with wings and breathes fire. But a modern person reads it and they don't know that, they can make that error.
Yeah, but I think the firmament is a great example of where they lie, right? Because, you could tell me that this passage here that says whale really meant big fish, and we're just gonna say fine, right? But there are some things that they're just flat out lies. The Bible's just wrong about some things, and the reason I like the firmament is because there's no moral to the story. It's just
Precisely.
a bad cosmology.
It's a detail.
Yeah, there's no lesson to take away from it, and because a lot of times people like to act like when the Bible isn't literally true, it's because there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger overarching moral lesson that you're supposed to take away from this. And I'm like, no, a lot of it's just lies, a lot of it's just wrong. They just pretended to know stuff that they did not know, that they were in fact wrong about.
Let me give you in the audience a couple more things that are in that vein. So one I've used repeatedly because I think it is the best example of having a Christian be presented with something that they have to give you an answer to that affects them personally, right? According to the Bible, that individual who believes in Jesus, believes in God, and is a Christian and has been baptized should have certain abilities that they should be able to demonstrate to you according to the text of the Bible, right? So I'm going to go to John 14, verse 11 through 14. believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, excuse me. And they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father, and I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it.
Yeah, Jesus sounds like a psychopath.
Look, Jesus sounds like a genie.
Yeah, he does. He does.
By the way, 3,000 Years of Longing is an excellent freaking movie, and it's streaming, I think, on either Netflix or Amazon Prime. I forget, but it's an excellent movie. It's about a genie, and very fascinating story. Okay, so let's go to Mark chapter 16, verse 15. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized," conditions, "whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And this is important, and these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name, they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands, and when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people, and they will get well." So these are essentially Mark 16 and John 14 have essentially sister verses, we could say. They're very similar. But we know if we just presented these to the most ardent believers in Jesus, they can't heal people just by laying their hands. They can't heal people with the simplicity of a prayer. It would be wonderful if that was true. I do think the world would be a better place because people would have prayed for world peace by now. People would have prayed for the elimination of sickness and disease by now. People would have prayed for an end to poverty without ending the people who are poor by now. There would have been all these wonderful solutions that would have come along and been powerfully effective in the world society if these verses were only true. So when I'm being at my most brutal, I'll whip out Mark 16 and ask people plainly, can you do this? So you're either not a Christian, which I don't believe, or it's not true. Now, the beauty of, as my ex-girlfriend, I gave her credit for coming up with a phrase I had never heard before, a Nobel Priest Prize. The people who in the first century or second century who won the Nobel Priest Prize are the people who came up with the idea of, well, it has to be what God wants. If it's not, I think in 1 John, it's conditional now.
Because that it only applies to certain people with those certain gifts.
Well, look, we now know, if let's just say we're in the first century, second century. I don't know when that stuff was written, but let's assume it was written 11 minutes after the crucifixion. Okay, so they're getting this down fresh. When they write a phrase like John 14 there, that, hey, Jesus is going to see to it that your prayer is answered. He will do it. He will do it. Okay? Notice there's a difference here. I hadn't noticed this before. In Mark 16, God will do it. In John, Jesus will do it. He'll do it himself. He talks about, believe when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Okay, so I guess when he ascends to heaven, maybe that's the difference. Once he's up there, look, I'm my dad's secretary. I handle a lot of his minor things, and he handles the big stuff like the creation of a dimension or universe or car keys. I handle the smaller stuff that people need. But anyway, it's a very odd thing. So the people who then say, well, look, people in our congregations aren't seeing this demonstrated. Jesus may have said it, okay, assuming Jesus was a real guy. He may have said it, and it appears not to be so. So is there something else at work that maybe Jesus forgot to tell us that is the reason why it's not working? Oh, it has to be in alignment with what God wants. Because if you have this enemy, you don't want your enemy to die or something awful to happen to them if it's not God's will, because maybe God means good for that person. And so we can't have you doing that. You're supposed to love your enemies according to Jesus. So let's just add a conditional phrase here that then people have to snap in alignment with, right? It's in 1 John, I'm pretty sure. Almost 1 John. God's will. I don't remember. Someone tried to use this against me. John 5, 1 John 5:14. Go to Bible Gateway, which I think is the best site for biblical studies. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that we have what we asked of him. So basically, God is going to give you what you ask for if it's according to his will. They're fixing it. It's just words. It's not true. So how do they fix it without rewriting everything? They just add another couple of sentences here that are just words as well. If it's God's will. So we could infer it. I'm not the first person to say it, that it's God's will that people die of cancer. It's God's will that people get hit by cars, buses, drown at sea, on and on and on, get stranded on islands, and there's not enough food for them to eat. There's no water. They die there alone, scared, and so on and so on. It's God's will that a meteor hit the earth so many millions years ago. It's God's will, and so on and so on and so on. All these natural disasters, the tsunamis, God's will, volcanoes blowing up and killing hundreds of people, God's will, and so on and so on and so on. People, as you say, finding their car keys, finally getting a new car, only to have to make 72 payments on it. Right?
Exactly.
It's God's will.
Absolutely.
Come on, folks.
Apparent that everybody knew that he exists, that still wouldn't remove the room or the need for faith in the sense of personal commitment, love, and trust in God. So I don't think that answers the question adequately, though it does make a good point that God doesn't coerce us to believe in him. But I think the very fact that this reveals that God's existence could be perfectly apparent, and yet people might not yet believe in him or trust in him, shows where the weakness in this objection lies. Why, we might ask, would God want to make his existence as apparent as possible? Why would he want to put a neon cross in the sky that says Jesus saves, for example? As the Christian philosopher Paul Moser has emphasized, on the Christian
Where is he recording this?
A matter of relative indifference.
Recorded live in my bathroom.
Whether or not people believe that he exists. And I find that non-Christians have a great difficulty understanding this. But in fact, that is the biblical view. For God, it is relatively a matter of indifference whether or not people believe that he exists. Rather,
now wait a second. Pause it. So on the basis, Christians have a hard job when it comes to explaining things to us, right? When they're trying to justify their beliefs, and the Bible keeps being their only source material. And yet, and this is, I don't think this is a fault. It certainly is true in a lot of cases. They don't recall all the verses or know of all the verses to present the best possible argument. We were already given from our audience Ephesians 2:8 to reference when I couldn't remember what it was. that faith is a gift from God. Craig is speaking to us as if he didn't know that that verse existed. He may have forgotten during the time where he's writing out his thoughts, right? Or putting them on note cards or however he does his presentation. But he's not considering that in this argument. It's utterly gone from what we've heard so far. We don't have a choice. But he's presenting this argument as if we did. But according to his own Bible, I got the floppy one right here. It's in here, folks. And even whether your Bible is floppy or not, it's in the New Testament, but he's not referencing it.
I think we're almost done.
A love relationship with us, a personal saving relationship. He's not interested in just getting us to believe.
Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. Today I've got Dr. William Lane Craig.
Yikes. Oh, I guess I got autoplay on or something. But all right, we made it through. I don't know what happened to my one black friend. There he goes.
Pocket locker?
Yeah.
All right, my friend Fanny called me. I gotta call it back. Not now. I can call it back later. Her dad's probably just out of surgery.
Yeah, no, he was actually done. So
was he? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I just think of all the arguments for God, all the defenses of Christianity. This is one of the most gaslighting ones. This idea that they really come up with a name for the pack that, and I think it's a confession that God doesn't apparently doesn't exist. And so, this is how you put a name to that. It reminds me of something, somebody once said to me, you guys just come up with a name for everything. And that's what this feels like. Oh, that's not, the atheist may tell you divine hiddenness is a problem, but let me tell you why it makes sense. It's
Pocket
when you
locker,
get to this point, you should give it up.
You're a scientist. When processes are being created or someone's fleshing out their theory, showing all the evidence that proves their hypothesis, as part of their theory. If there isn't a term in existence for what they're describing, they have to think one up.
Oh, yeah, you can,
right?
Yeah.
So it has to be called something. Just like when people were building the discipline of studying theology, regardless of which religion it is.
Sure.
They had to create terms to go along with that. Yes, things have to be named. I've got a 57 Chevy truck. There isn't a part, not one single part for that truck that does not have a name.
Right.
Nothing is called a thingy.
Right.
It's a captive, right? It's a captive nut. There are no widgets that go into building this truck. There are, I don't know if there are hundreds of thousands of parts, but there's certainly thousands of parts. I bought some of them twice. So it's just the way of things. It's not something that should be complained about, simply understood as a practice of we need to have a discussion. I'll say one of the most valuable things we can do when having discussions about this or anything else is defining our terms or understanding what the other person means when they use a term. Because as many of us have seen, you really could be missing each other's arguments if you don't have the same understanding. It's okay to meet them where they're at. It's okay for them to meet you where you are. If there's an audience, you both have to let that audience know this is what this means for this discussion.
Well, yeah, these are actually big distinctions because, again, he's kind of misrepresenting the whole thing, because atheists would claim God doesn't exist. So the evidence for God is not apparent or convincing. What William Lane Craig and theists actually are saying is no, God exists. He's hiding. And that's actually, you make up a good point that we're actually, if you got technical about it, we're really not saying it's, and this is what's wrong with apologists, is like they never want to sit down and have the honest conversation. Because again, I say God doesn't exist, I can't see him, he's going to say, look at the trees. It should be obvious. But if it isn't, it's because God has divine motivation for not making himself apparent to you, which is quite a big difference, actually.
Well, look, I have trees. When I bought this property, there were probably 70 plus trees on it. And I've cut quite a few of them down because some of them were, their location was poorly selected, if I'm being generous. A lot of them are pine trees. I've complained about it before. This is the worst tree to put near your house. You get needles all year round, unless you sell and harvest the needles and someone likes them as mulch, which you see in Alabama and Georgia and maybe other places in the South. You dye them red and you sell them for a premium. I'm not trying to do that.
Right.
So I have to literally, after I'm done with this conversation, I'm going to go rake pine needles for an hour and a half. I would say if there is a God and he's creating trees, maybe say, okay, well, I'm going to, like a computer software program like Excel, which is the best program ever invented for the computer, I'm convinced of. Anyway, so I'm going to make conditional formatting here. If this pine tree is put next to a house and the person doesn't want all the needles, they don't fall off. I've improved the pine tree.
Right.
It will secrete an enzyme that will make it unappetizing to bees and bugs that will normally eat it. If a tree is turned into lumber and that lumber is going to be used for a house, it becomes inedible to, the different pests that will eat it away. Right? I'm already improving trees. And you can look at all the trees you want, but we could have better trees. You could say, well, you could select redwood, which is naturally resistant to a lot of pests. Well, I don't have redwood. I didn't build this house. Somebody else did. So it's automatically done because I thought about this stuff ahead of time. Maybe you make it inflammable, so you can't burn it. Not inflammable, not flammable, so it can't be burned. So people aren't going to die in house fires if their house is made of wood. I can use concrete cinder blocks to build a house, and that problem goes away. Right? The house isn't going to burn down. Your roof might, but the rest of the house is going to be standing. So there are better ideas than, evidently, if there is a God, there are better ideas than the ones he had.
Right.
He should have seen the future coming and said, well, I can make all these changes so that things are better for people. And maybe that's better evidence that there would be a God if the needles wouldn't fall off a tree if it's planted near a house, right? Or a house is put near the trees. The behavior of the trees changes. Now that's evidence of the divine, maybe. For me, at least something I'd be grateful for.
Right.
Because F all these pine needles. I told my fiance when we buy a house, if there's a pine tree that could fall on it, I'm getting rid of it. I'm going to incinerate it. Anyway, it's my complaint. It's my complaint. You can tell I got pine tree issues. A needle got in my eye the other week, and I was just like, I'm done with this house. I'm done with this house.
Oh, I've got so much crap going on, man.
Yeah, your trees fell down.
Yeah.
Would you like some? You can come to my house. I'll give you like 16 pine trees.
Oh, nah. I'm just the maintenance people. We got to come and get rid of it. But it's been here too long. They need to hurry up. They said there was a lot of them that fell. So,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
A lot of free mulch in your community.
Yeah, definitely.
Coming up.
All right. Well, I'll let you get to it. And this was a fun one. We can hopefully people can catch it later. I'm so glad so many of you were here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you all.
It was really awesome. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much. As always, be good to yourselves.
And pine trees.
And not the pine trees. All right, gang. We'll see you next time.
All right.